Alright guys, this will be our first video for AP Euro on Thursday, April 30th. We did Italian unification yesterday. We're going to now pick up with German unification. Although Italian unification had important implications for the rest of Europe, the rest of the unified German state in 1871 totally altered the balance of power in Europe, owing to the great military and economic strength of this new state. The story of German unification is rooted in the Napoleonic era. Napoleon's domination of large parts of Germany not only increased the demand among German patriots for the creation of a unified nation, but it also reduced the sheer number of independent German states, which eventually aided in the actual process of unification. Following the fall of Napoleon, Austria and Prussia were the two dominant states within the German Confederation. In 1848, it appeared as if German unification would be achieved when the Frankfurt Parliament offered the crown to the Prussian king, but Frederick William's refusal to delay the process until it was achieved through the means the Prussians found more conducive to their interest. Although it was not a foregone conclusion that it was to be Prussia rather than Austria that would take the lead in crafting a unified Germany, Prussia did enjoy a number of significant advantages. Prussia, through its creation of the Zollverein, had achieved an economic preeminence over the other member states, while Austria was specifically excluded by Prussia for membership in the Zollverein customs union. By mid-century, Prussia had achieved a significant measure of industrialization, while Austria remained a primarily agricultural state. In addition, the Austrian Empire was a polyglot state made up of numerous nationalities, while Prussia was primarily a German state. Perhaps most important to this dominance, Prussia enjoyed the services of one of the most remarkable statesmen in the 19th century, Otto von Bismarck. On taking the throne of Prussia, Wilhelm I made the most important decision of his reign when he selected Bismarck as his prime minister. Wilhelm had engaged at the time in a fight with the parliament over military reforms that he wanted to order to challenge Austrian supremacy in German Confederation. To break the impasse, William turned to Bismarck, a Junker Prussian noble, who was known for his arch-conservative views. Standing before the Parliamentary Budget Commission, Bismarck delivered his blood and iron speech, in which he said, "Germany is not looking to Prussia's liberalism, but to her power. It is not by speeches and majority resolutions of the great questions of the time will be decided. That was the mistake of 1848 and 1849, but by iron and blood." Despite the colorful speech, the Parliament still refused to vote in favor of the military budget. Never one to bother with constitutional niceties, Bismarck simply ignored Parliament and proceeded to collect the taxes and implement the reforms anyway. To their great discredit, the Prussian liberals did nothing to oppose this blatant disregard for their authority. The key to his plan to create a unified German state was to modernize the Prussian army by giving it the latest weapons. The first stage of this plan took place in 1864 and involved an alliance with Austria against Denmark over the disputed territories of Schleswig and Holstein. After easily defeating the Danes, known as the Danish War, the German-Danish War, Schleswig came under Prussian control, while Holstein was run by the Austrians. Bismarck cunningly set up the system because he wanted the Danish dispute to help achieve his next goal, war with Austria. By 1866, Prussia prepared for war by securing an alliance with Italy, which wanted to see the final removal of Austria from Italian lands, and securing a promise of nonpartisan participation from the French. Then Prussia, under Bismarck's orders, declared war on Austria, citing the petty dispute over the governance of Holstein as the reason for the attack. The modernization program undertaken by the Prussian army proved to be astonishingly successful, as Prussian forces brought about the defeat of Austria in a matter of 7 weeks, the 7 Weeks' War, or the Austrian-Prussian War. Ignoring the advice of both his king and his generals, who wanted to stage a victory parade through the streets of Vienna and to annex the large pieces of the Austrian Empire, Bismarck wisely treated Austria with courtesy to keep her out of the next stage of his plan, war with France. After the defeat with the Austrians, Bismarck annexed those small German states into the north that had supported Austria in the conflict. Other northern German states were convinced to join Prussia in the creation of what became known as the Northern German Confederation. The states of southern Germany, while remaining independent, concluded a military alliance with Prussia in case of French aggression. In 1870, the final stage of Bismarck's plan was set in motion when he provoked a war with the French, the Franco-Prussian War. Bismarck with great cunning made France the outward aggressor in a conflict that began when a prince, who was a kinsman of the Prussian king, a Hausarian, was invited to take the vacant throne of Spain. To Napoleon III, the thought of the Hausarian rulers on two fronts was too much to contemplate. Napoleon III initially wanted diplomatic victory when William I agreed to withdraw his cousin's name. However, Bismarck, who was desperately wanted war, rewrote the so-called Ems dispatch, a telegram sent by the Prussian king to Bismarck informing him what had transpired in the conversation between the king and the French ambassador, to make it appear as though the king had insulted France. Bowing to the demands of an outraged French public, Napoleon III declared war on Prussia. Following the decisive Battle of Sedan, France, which many believe had the finest army in the world, was soundly defeated by Prussia. Using Prussia's newfound prestige earned by achieving this victory, Bismarck was able to either convince or bribe the rulers of other German states to accept the creation of the Germany under Prussian leadership. And on January 18, 1871, Wilhelm I became the Kaiser of a unified German Empire. The creation of the German Empire completely changed the direction of European history. Here's some examples. The new German state created a bitter enemy of France, which lost the territories of Alsace and Lorraine and was forced to pay a huge indemnity to Germany for having started the war. The economic power of this new German state had created rising tensions with Great Britain and helped set in motion the rush to build colonial empires in the last quarter of the 19th century. The mad scramble began when Bismarck encouraged the French to build an empire in Africa to distract from the loss of Alsace and Lorraine. Eventually, all the nations of Europe sought to create overseas empires as a means to further their political economic interests within a Europe that was trying to adjust to the tensions that arose from the development of a powerful German state. This new Germany was also not necessarily a very stable entity. Created by military might, its military commanders had a great influence over the nation at large, particularly following the forced retirement of Bismarck in 1890. Prior to being put out to pasture, Bismarck had worried about the internal dangers facing the new nation and therefore attacked two groups he deemed to be a threat to the internal cohesion of the Reich, the Catholics and Socialists. Fearful that Catholics owed an allegiance to the Church that extended beyond nationalism to Germany, Bismarck responded with an attack on the Catholic Church in a conflict known as the Kulturkampf, in which he insisted on controlling all church appointments and on gaining complete supervision over Catholic education. Eventually, because of Catholic resentment towards policies, Bismarck backed away from the struggle. He turned to another perceived enemy, the Socialists, and in 1878, Bismarck called for the passage of the Reichstag on the ban of socialist right to assemble and to publish materials. Bismarck also attempted to limit the political appeal of socialists by establishing old age pensions and other social benefits for all Germans. However, as in the case of the Catholics, Bismarck found that oppressing the German Social Democratic Party merely increased its appeal. Despite his seemingly hostile nature, Bismarck was seen as having helped establish the glory of Germany and its peoples. His efforts to co-opt the appeal of socialism increased his prestige in later years. However, he ultimately rose to power and remained in power for over 25 years, thanks to his careful manipulation of the press and monarchs of Germany. Prussia, and later Germany, was a conservative aristocratic state. Bismarck ruled at the pleasure of the king, not the people, and his poor relations with Wilhelm II led to his less able statesman taking his place, jeopardizing his fragile peace with Russia and ultimately sacrificing German stability for the sake of German glory. Okay, we'll move on. France, in the back half of the century. France seemed to have a tortured existence throughout the 19th century as it continued to grapple with the legacy of the French Revolution. A measure of stability finally emerged with the rise of the Third French Republic in 1870, though it too had to deal with the past as it still divided segments of the French public. Following his victory in the December of 1848 election, Louis Napoleon became the first and only president of the short-lived Second Republic. He used a tool developed by his uncle, Napoleon. Following a constitutional dispute with the legislature, he staged a plebiscite in 1851 that polled the people about whether to grant him dictatorial powers for a 10-year period. After winning this vote, Napoleon moved on in the following year to stage another plebiscite, this time on a question of whether to create a second French empire. Although there were numerous electoral irregularities, apparently large numbers of Frenchmen were perfectly content to see the rival of the empire in the hope of once again seeing France take the dominant position in Europe. France prospered greatly during the first 10 years of the reign of Napoleon III. Cheap credit provided by the government allowed for significant economic expansion during this period. The city of Paris underwent a remarkable transformation from a medieval city to a modern one under the guidance of Georges Haussmann, who cleared many of the slums of the city and in their place built the wide avenues that have become a hallmark of Paris. Besides making the city more attractive visually, this new Paris was a much cleaner place with aqueducts to bring fresh water in the city and sewers to remove waste, resulting in the elimination of one of the great scourges of the early part of the century, cholera. We'll stop the first video there.